Okay, good afternoon. We're going to get started. This panel is in the envious position of being right after lunch. So I'm sure that they're going to stir it up a little bit to keep everybody motivated. This panel is the commercial spaceflight in today's environment. And it's being led by my friend Eric Stallmer. And Eric is president of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. The Commercial Spaceflight Federation is dedicated to promoting the development of commercial spaceflight, pursuing ever higher levels of safety, and sharing best practices and expertise throughout the industry. Eric's been around Washington for a while, and he's a good speaker. He has been featured on high-profile media outlets. He's testified before the House, before the Senate. I've known Eric for quite a while. He helped me understand the DC environment, and then the next day it all changed, and I came back to Huntsville. Before he joined CSF, he was Vice President of Government Relations at Analytical Graphics. He has been the leader of the Space Transportation Association, has been on Capitol Hill. And one of the things I found out by trying to coordinate this session, he's a very busy man. I caught him while he was doing some of his service as an officer in the Army Reserves, and also I think from leaving a piano lesson with one of his daughters as he was working. But Eric is a hard worker and a hard charger, and I'm really glad to have you here leading this session. So Eric, I'll let you take it over and introduce your panel.
Just microphone from Kremley height there. One, thank you, Chris, so much for that very, very kind introduction, and thank you more so for our friendship over the years and for having me on this panel. It has been busy in our industry lately, and actually just yesterday I was in Germany, in Bremen. It's sort of a very similar panel, the Space Tech Expo. The funny thing in Bremen, they call themselves the Space City. And I made it very clear to them that I think there's only one space city, and that's in Huntsville, Alabama, and that's where I'll be traveling to. So we agreed to disagree, but they are Space City Europe, and you guys are Space City World or USA. Either way. But we're certainly living in very unique and changing times in our industry, not just from a technological perspective, but also a policy perspective. As many of you guys saw just earlier this month, the Vice President Pence, kicked off the National Space Council, which I think has been very, very exciting for all of us. Exciting in the way that the mystery that shrouds it, that what is the policy going to do, what are the issues that they're going to tackle. And they're various, but one of the ones that is very exciting is this renewed effort to go from the moon and eventually onto Mars. And today we have on our panel four of the many companies that are going to help us take us on that journey. So I'm very, very excited about that. I'm excited about the way that the National Space Council is going to look at our various regulatory policies. One of the things that the Vice President asked for was for industry to get together with the government agencies and work to streamline the regulatory process. There's so many barriers right now. Barriers to launch, regulatory barriers on utilization of commercial, a number of different things that we have to really look at if we want to truly continue this great innovation that we have in the States. So removing barriers to innovation is probably one of our top concerns. This year alone, as we looked in the past, if you had 10 licensed launches a year, you're doing well. I think one company alone this year will almost double that in 2017. And I only see the events in 2018 and beyond to be even more robust, busier, exciting, and challenging. And again, so we have these four panelists today. I'm going to briefly go over their bio. Just know, and I say briefly, just know that they're all college educated. There's no criminal backgrounds, incredibly accomplished, and wonderful speakers. So I'll leave out, about 15 or 20 years of their career if they have that much. First, I want to talk Vern Thorpe. Vern is the Director of Commercial Programs for United Launch Alliance. He works with his customers to integrate launch missions on ULA's vehicles, and he supports all the new vehicle development and new business pursuits. Vern began his career helping develop the Atlas 1 and 2 rockets, or launch systems, and has integrated numerous missions on Atlas, Delta, Proton, and Sea Launch. Next to Vern, Julie Van Cleek, someone who has been in our industry and needs no introduction, but Julie is Aerojet's Vice President of Advanced Space and Launch Business Units. She's responsible for space and launch propulsion, power, research, technology development, product development programs, including the AR-1. Also, her program includes technology responsibilities, including SLS propulsion, Orion propulsion, commercial crew propulsion, power, advanced electric propulsions for the ISS. It goes on and on and on. Julie began her career at Aerojet in 1981 and has been in your current position since, I think, 2013. Next, we have Sam Gunderson. Sam works on the business development and strategic team for Blue Origin up in Kent, Washington. This includes working with systems integration and government customers in understanding their architectural requirements and matching them to their human-rated space systems. Prior to joining Blue in 2014, Sam led the business development at Cimarron, and his experience also includes about 13 years at Boeing Space Exploration for working on the International Space Station. Travis Langster is the Vice President of Space Situational Awareness Business Unit at AGI. Travis in this role, he's responsible for strategic and business development within the commercial and national security space community, and he supports the solution-oriented applications of AGI software for many of the national security and commercial systems. So with that, we're going to have each of our panelists come up for about between 7 and 10 minutes, give a little overview of what they're doing, some of the programs that they're working on, and then we're going to follow it up with a robust Q&A period. So with that said, Travis is going to get us started, and then we'll go to Sam, Vern, and Julie. If that works. Okay. What's that?
I think I'll stay here if that's okay. Awesome, thank you. Thanks, Eric, and really honored to be here to provide some remarks on this topic as it relates to commercial spaceflight. As you may have noticed, my role, AGI is not a launch provider, obviously, but I hope to share some of the challenges and opportunities that are related to commercial spaceflight. So if we'll bring up my slides, thank you. What I'll start with is a few videos. So make sure I'm hitting the right button here. Okay. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Okay, so I must have, go to slide 2, how about that? Perfect, and if you start that video, if the video doesn't play, that's how it ends, and there it is. So what this video is intended to depict, if it does play, there we go, it's showing the amount of debris over time. So if you see there on the x-axis, it's time, on the y, it's the number of objects, starting from the very first object, a Sputnik. But what you'll notice in this video, there are a few significant upticks in the amount of debris. And of course, 2007 was the Chinese ASAT uptick. And then in 2009, the Iridium Cosmos uptick. And you also see the orbits of all of those objects come into view. In the public catalog, it's over, the number of objects in the public catalog is over 64% is actually debris. Okay, if you go to the next slide. And so what this one depicts is the next 2 slides depict the amount of debris in each of the major orbit regimes. This first one here is in the LEO, low Earth orbit catalog. And what this shows is the number of objects based on size, and also has a color showing the different colors in the various objects. The public catalog tracks objects down to about 10 centimeters. However, it's estimated that the size of objects that could cause catastrophic failure to satellites and, of course, other debris generating events is actually around 2 centimeters. And so you'll see that there are hundreds of thousands more objects in the LEO space catalog that actually exist that are much smaller and that can be detected by today's public catalog. And we can go to the next slide. Same situation within the geo regime. Both of these, because of both of these situations, it's approximately about 4% of the actual objects that are in space that can actually be tracked, at least in today's public catalog. So as this video plays and shows not only the objects in GEO, but the objects that cross through the GEO regime, very similar situation. Public catalog tracks roughly around a meter or so in the GEO regime. But there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of more objects that cannot be tracked, at least not in the public catalog. So obviously that presents a significant challenge as the commercial spaceflight operations continues at its very fast pace. We can go to the next slide. So those are the objects that are in space. There are also certain events that take place that create debris. This one happens to be the Russian rocket body, Breeze-M, that exploded on orbit. This created a debris field in the GEO regime. It happened to also pass fairly close to other operating satellites, introducing additional risk. When we originally created this video, we knew exactly which satellites were at risk, but they of course asked us not to depict their names. So they depicted satellite 1, 2, and 3, but nonetheless, operating in space, whether it's GEO or LEO, has risk from the debris that's already there, but also real-world events that take place. Let's go to the next slide. Staying with the theme of real-world events, current events, this past summer, I think it was about a 6-week time span. That's a video as well. You can press play. There were 3 satellite anomalies. Effectively, these satellites lost complete control. One of them was the Telcom 1, another one was EchoStar, another one was AMC-9. These satellites, one of them was doing a maneuver, lost complete control, drifting through the GEO belt uncontrollably, and also tumbling. Apologize about that video not playing. So I'll give you a little bit of description. There was also some videos, you may have seen some videos on the internet depicting things coming off of these satellites. There's a debate whether or not there were any pieces breaking off. Could it have been just fuel that was picked up and had some type of optical reflection? Nonetheless, we AGI, through our commercial SSA services and ComSpot, those satellite operators quickly became customers of commercial SSA services. But we also had to alert other operators in the vicinity of those operating satellites to perform maneuvers that were needed to reduce the risk to their operating satellites. We continue working with those operators and helping them in their disposal measures. So those are some other things that occur. Why don't we go to the next slide? So what does commercial spaceflight look in the next 10 years or so? Next slide. This is intended to be an eye chart, but the bottom line here is looking at the mega constellations there on the left-hand side. If you look at things like SpaceX and Boeing and others, thousands of constellations expected over the next 10 years. Next slide. Go back one, sorry. What I want to highlight in some of those highlighted portions, if you look at SpaceX and looking at a 2-centimeter catalog with a 3-kilometer threshold, in the next 10 years, they could get over 72 million conjunction warnings. That's obviously not manageable. That amounts to perhaps 380,000 or so per day. So these are not manageable situations and represent significant challenges. And that's why, where commercial SSA services and space traffic management action is needed, not only action, but effective action to enable safety of flight. Even if half of these mega constellations make it successfully, which they look to be in a very positive trajectory, pun intended. Next slide, please. So given this the 50th anniversary of the Outer Space Treaty, I also had to show some real-world activities about space operations that not quite sure what's going on and don't follow the standard norms of behavior in terms of space operations. So if you go to the next video. This next video is, we call it SJ-17. It's a Chinese launch. Happened to have a payload and a rocket body doing some very interesting maneuvers in the GEO regime. It's not often that a rocket body is performing these types of maneuvers just above GEO and below GEO, performing these maneuvers. And then you have the satellite itself perform a rendezvous and proximity operations around another, in this case, happened to be a Chinese satellite. So there are other activities happening in space that are certainly controllable, but their intended purposes are not very well known. And this is just one of many of those types of situations that happen in space. So again, I think I'll wrap up there, but in terms of safety of flight, it's not only the man-made debris and the natural debris that's in space, but it's also the norms and natural behaviors of operating in space that represent challenges for these companies as they launch satellites and mega constellations into space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You can put up Sam Gunderson's charts, please. Thank you. Next chart. So Blue Origin was set up by Jeff Bezos. He has a long-term vision of millions of people living and working in space. He's got a long view of the world. I think if you're familiar with him, he is somebody that really has a grand vision. In addition to having Blue Origin, he has a 10,000-year clock, which is really a time capsule that the community is going to be able to play in. And I think this vision, and if you look at all the things he's involved in, it really points to the fact that he has the long view. And I think that long view really enables Blue to meet the objectives that he has planned for the company. Next chart. So if you've had the good fortune of listening to Jeff speak, he often talks about how the Earth is well suited for human life, and that taking good care of the Earth and moving manufacturing to space where you have infinite resources, you have infinite power, you have the opportunity to protect the Earth and grow the economy in a way that potentially it might not if we kept everything here on Earth. Next chart. I guess I can maybe do it. So Blue Origin is focused on reusability of launch vehicles currently. When Jeff started Blue, he wanted to go and explore beyond the Earth's surface. He found that rockets were very expensive, rocket engines were very expensive, and soon he found out if he wanted to do things affordably, he was going to have to develop his own propulsion systems, his own launch vehicles. And Blue Origin decided to work towards a vertical takeoff, vertical landing, reusable architecture. 2015 was a great year for us. We demonstrated several. 5 times we launched and landed the same rocket. Each of those flights had a different test objective. All of those objectives were met. And we went ahead and completed our test program with that launch vehicle. And we were able to prepare that system for human spaceflight. New Shepard, for the most part, is really a test program for Blue Origin to develop our reusability architecture. And we're designing that system for humans, and we're using it for test programs for people that want to fly their experiments that they would want to go to ISS. So in combination with flying people's experiments, having the opportunity to fly humans in space and what that means is a really important part of what the New Shepard program is about. You can see in this example here, we're showing where we had our escape test. This was our last test flight of this particular system. This particular launch vehicle and a spacecraft were retired and now going around the country for different shows. You can see we have our systems are designed for reusability. We use cryogenic engines like hydrogen and liquefied natural gas or methane. And those systems allow us to graciously allow the engine to evaporate without having to get in and do a lot of cleaning for it. You can see that was a pretty exhilarating ride, as Ariane said in when she was watching it live, but everybody would have had a fun ride, but a safe ride in the end. And you can see how the spacecraft landed in the desert safely. So this is our test vehicle at Oshkosh. We had a lot of great lines. I know that we had a lot of great reviews from that particular episode or particular event. Very much the same display we had at Space Symposium. If you had the opportunity to sit into the mock-up. So what makes a launch vehicle reusable? Well, we designed our launch vehicles to be reusable from the onset. We use aerodynamic control surfaces. We have a ring fin, which allows it to have passive stability as it falls through the atmosphere. And then we use wedge fins and drag brakes to slow it down at the last moment. The aft fins control the vehicle laterally as it gets close to the launch pad and allows us to keep the proper orientation as it flies to the center of the launch pad. And the engine restart, which is an important part of the flight. You've seen it. It's the first time you see it, you're almost unsure if it's actually going to start and land. But it is unbelievable to watch when you see that launch vehicle take off, or when the rocket starts. One of the side benefits of having the tap-off cycle of the engine, which means it pulls a little bit off of the combustion chamber, is as the rocket is falling through the atmosphere, a little bit of flow is going through the tap-off and turning the turbo machinery, so it lights really quickly, and we were able to get that benefit from a fuel standpoint in the launch. And then obviously we have landing gear that's a part of the aft module. So this video here is what our customers would have if they were to fly on the New Shepard system. It's about a 12-minute flight with about 4-ish minutes, a little more than 4 minutes of zero-G or micro-G. We've had several of what I found interesting when we created these videos of the flights and the landings. We were having a hard time visually seeing exactly. It was almost unbelievable that the rocket would come down that fast and land, but it was shocking how accurate those visualizations were of the launch vehicle. And I have a lot of confidence that this is very much what the customers will see. These are the largest windows that are going to fly in space or have flown in space. Everybody will have their own window. There will be 6 people on each launch. That piece in the middle is actually our escape engine, or escape motor, which is provided by our good partner, Aerojet Rocketdyne. And you can see that you can get a really good view of the Earth. You get to be able to see the curvature of the Earth. You can see the launch vehicle falling away. Part of the desert where we have the launch facility is we're just south of Guadalupe Peak, which is the tallest peak in Texas. You'll be able to see it in the back of the video there. That's a great valley to be flying from. There's a lot to see, and it's a beautiful part of the country. You just have to take a closer look than you might want to. But I enjoy it. So you can see how everybody's responsible for getting into their own seat and coming down through the parachutes. And so this is a traditional rocket ride with a fullest envelope escape, and we're really comfortable that our customers will have a great ride. Jeff Ashby is in charge of quality or mission assurance at Blue, which some of you people may know him, and he is squarely focused on preparing that system for human spaceflight. So Blue Origin is focused on operational reusability. So this particular launch, we had a little extra time, so I put some of the videos in here. But I love this video because this is the one time where we had some UAVs flying around, and we're able to get some excellent imagery that we haven't captured since. That particular image, we had a camera in the outside mounted in the door of the spacecraft, and it showed, we call it the horizon cam, right there. And then, so that shows a great curvature of the Earth as well. We have cameras all around the spacecraft. You can see some clouds going by right there on the right. And then we have a soft landing at 3 miles an hour. The powder coming up is really from the landing system blowing up the desert floor as it lands. So New Glenn. So everything we're learning with New Shepard is really about New Glenn. And New Glenn is our orbital system. And some of you might have seen some of the facilities we're working on down in Florida. We have this facility here where we're building the New Glenn launch vehicle. It's a huge investment, and I knew how big it was, but the first time I took the tour of it, I was just stunned, frankly, how big it was and how much investment we're putting into that facility. It is, when you go into that facility and you go to the West Texas facility, you can really get a strong sense of the commitment that Blue has for these systems. So this is the launch pad. We took over pad 36 over near on the Canaveral side. It's near where the lighthouse is to the right. It's a heritage Atlas pad, has got a great history, and I think we'll do it justice with our launch vehicle there when we start operations. So this is our animation of our launch vehicle since it's not completed. You can see that has a blue flame. That's because it's LNG rather than the traditional smoke that you see from RP. You can see we're focused on our customers with payloads. It's not just about the rocket. I think it's important that we should demonstrate that. You can see that we have strakes designed for this launch vehicle. It gives us some cross range, gives us the ability to fly the booster, land, with some grace onto the ship that is going to capture it. This is the part we get paid for, right here, putting the payload on orbit. So we're very focused on suborbital, LEO, and also GTO customers for this particular launch vehicle. And the third stage will be focused on delivering payloads beyond into the CISLUNAR architecture. So additionally, I know when recently we announced at another show that we're bypassing the 5-meter fairing and going straight to the 7-meter fairing in order to reduce our investment costs. Anytime we spoke with a customer about the 7-meter fairing, they've all been pretty excited about it. It gives them an opportunity to build their satellites differently, potentially do some things that they might not have thought they could do in the past. But not as big as SLSs, that's true. So a big part of what we're doing at Blue is developing the BE-4. It's a liquefied natural gas, 550,000-pound thrust engine. We're developing it for our use on New Glenn, but we're also in partnership developing it for others, and primarily that would be ULA. And we look forward to working with them in the future as we progress in that relationship. The things that are positive about methane and LNG versus RP are that LNG is being a cryogenic allows us to really do things differently. It's closer to the temperature of the liquid oxygen, makes it easier to launch the vehicle. It's about 1/3 of the cost of RP, and when where that really comes in is not so much in operations, but really in the test program. What that allows you to do is really reduce the the cost of the fuel associated with testing. So, because there's a lot of seconds worth of testing that has to go in the program. And also this engine has autogenous pressurization of the launch vehicle. So we're allowing helium to be taken off the stage. And as you know, helium is a limited resource and had become very expensive. So those are some of the side benefits associated with the engine. And the good news is after a great effort by our team and great excitement, we were able to have our first hot fire of the full engine. And I just can't express how excited our team was when this happened. It was, if you saw the excited engineers the first time we landed the PM, it was the exact same emotion when we had this hot fire. And I think what really makes this exciting is this was the first time we lit the full engine, and we actually had the test run to duration as planned, which was not anticipated. You know, there's a lot of sensors on that engine that could have redlined, but they didn't, and it's hard to communicate the excitement associated with it. All right. Might not pick. I don't think I should push the pineapple. Okay. So this is the next big program that we're focused on. You know, we talked about Blue Moon. Blue Moon is, I think, fits well with our New Glenn launch vehicle. We're very focused on space logistics. And I think, you know, what we've heard from some of our NASA customers here, you know, having commercial have competencies, capabilities of delivering product or logistics onto the moon as a service will really be a real opportunity for industry and for the agency. And I think Blue is really positioning themselves in partnership with NASA to develop that architecture. You know, I came from this community, from the human spaceflight community, where at NASA and other industries, and I think Blue really wants to work with the rest of the community to make sure that our systems connect and communicate with the broader architecture. Because, you know, as a taxpayer and as being a part of the community, I want to see SLS and Orion fly. You know, we paid a lot of money for those systems. We want to see them fly. They'll create an architecture that becomes a customer for the rest of the commercial market. And if we don't support those programs, you know, then it's going to be tougher for the rest of us to have customers as well. So I really look forward to seeing those systems fly and Blue be able to work with NASA and the rest of the community to support them. All right, I think that's it. All righty.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm sure there's going to be several questions to follow on what you guys are doing and the interest level you guys are creating. Next, I'd like to turn it over to Vern Thorpe, who's going to give a little overview on what ULA is doing in the commercial marketplace.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric. So could we pull up the ULA charts, please? So my name's Vern Thorpe. I'm ULA's Director of Commercial Programs. When I say commercial, to me that means the traditional commercial, the ComSats and imaging satellites, as well as some of the kind of quasi-governmental missions that we're flying, the commercial cargo missions for flying for NASA, for example. So I'm going to give an overview of ULA, give you some background, and then I'll end up focusing more on that. So at ULA, we're driven by our mission. We have a very concise mission statement. It's to save lives, explore the universe, and connect the world. And I think we deliver on all of those, both for our DoD customer as well as our commercial customers. And I can provide examples and talk a lot more about that when we get into the questions later on. We do it one at a time since ULA was formed, which is almost 11 years ago. Our anniversary is on December 1st. We formed December 1st of 2006. We've launched 122 times. We've met the mission requirements every time. So 100% mission success, averaging almost once a month. And then, of course, if you look at the Delta and the Atlas programs that came together when ULA was formed, that heritage of reliability and successful missions even goes back quite a bit further. I think if you look at Atlas alone, back into the Atlas 1 and 2 program. We're up to about 145, 150 consecutive successful launches, and Delta has a similar record as well. So we think we bring a tremendous amount of experience to the industry. In fact, this year, 2017, is the 60th anniversary of both the first Atlas and the first Delta launch. So 120 years of combined experience. So we're definitely coming at this from a different direction than the Blue Origin folks, for example, but I think coming at serving the commercial marketplace from those different directions is actually very healthy for the country. It gives the customer, it gives the government choices. We are headquartered just south of Denver in Centennial, Colorado. We've got about 1,000 engineers there, and we also have a few hundred business people, and that's where our executive staff is headquartered as well. Our launch operations take place on both coasts, both Vandenberg and Cape Canaveral. We currently have 5 launch pads. And most of our manufacturing takes place just about 45 minutes from here in Decatur. And we also have some manufacturing facilities in Harlingen, Texas, and in Pueblo, Colorado as well. We've done a lot over the last few years to streamline the company, to reduce the size of our staff. But while we do that, we continue to invest in the future. We have a very robust college hiring program. We want to keep bringing in the latest technology and all those new ideas. And we have a very robust college intern program as well. And I think it's kind of unique. One of the big highlights of that program is that every summer the interns that come in get to actually design, build, and launch a rocket. And a couple of years ago, our intern team actually set the world's record for the largest sport rocket. You know, we started off with what looked like big Estes rockets. We're up to a rocket now that's 2-3 feet in diameter, 53 feet tall. And we actually partner with Ball Aerospace up the road and with some of the local schools, and their interns make payloads. So when this thing launches, it literally has dozens of payloads. It has payloads in every section of the rocket body. It's a 2-stage rocket. It has payloads that jettison sideways during flight, and you know, it can range from little plastic figures with parachutes that maybe a grade school provided to some very elaborate sensors that gather atmospheric data, or even drones that get ejected and then can be remotely piloted back down to the ground. So it's kind of a highlight of the intern program every year. The biggest problem we have now is finding a range not too far away from Denver where we can actually launch this thing. And Fort Carson Army Base actually helped us out with that last year. So this is how we do it. This is our fleet. If you look at all the different permutations of Atlas and Delta that we have right now, different numbers of SRBs, different size payload fairings, we actually have 41 configurations in our family right now. So that allows us to really tailor the vehicle to the customer's need. At the same time, we see some opportunities there to consolidate. And I'll talk in a moment about our Vulcan program, which is going to increase our capability in providing services to our customers while significantly simplifying our fleet. So our current customer base is who you might expect. The national security arena, the Department of Defense, is our biggest customer right now. We do a lot of civil missions. By civil, I mean NASA missions. The vast majority of all the NASA science missions that have ever been launched have flown on our vehicles or our heritage vehicles. We've flown to every planet in the solar system, including some planets that people don't think are full-fledged planets anymore. And we've been supporting commercial space to varying degrees since the 1970s, when the first communication satellites went up. A lot of those flew on Deltas and Atlases. And we still launch a few commercial payloads, especially when a customer has an urgent need to get a very critical asset on orbit to introduce a new capability or to try to capture a market, not something that they would want to take a chance on and just buy insurance if the launch didn't work out, or if they have a critical schedule need. Those are the two of the things that we pride ourselves on, is the technical reliability and also the schedule assurance that we can bring. Let's see, it's hard to see the chart here. So on the right-hand side, human launch is the new space that we're moving into, and there's a lot of commercial activity there because that includes the commercial crew and the commercial cargo activity, and that's what I'm going to focus on, that and Vulcan for the rest of this. So I'd like to remind everybody that when the first American, John Glenn, orbited the Earth, he wasn't the first American, but he was the first American to orbit the Earth. He flew on an Atlas. was followed by several other Mercury astronauts, and the fact that Atlas was engaged with human spaceflight right from the beginning has always been a source of inspiration to those of us who work on the program, and I can't tell you how excited we are. I mean, it just gives us chills to think that we're going to be getting back into that business next year. We have been looking forward to this for decades in some cases, so it's a huge deal. We've done a lot of work down at Complex 41 at Cape Canaveral to get ready for this. This is a picture of the crew access tower that we developed. We started construction of this in 2014. The challenge was it's a major piece of structure right adjacent to the launch pad that we were flying off of every month. So we built that crew access tower in sections down the road, a little further away on base, and we would bring them in between launches. So we'd have 2 or 3 weeks where we could work on construction, get a segment built, and then we'd have to secure everything, get ready for our next commercial launch. We'd launch. As soon as that was done, the crew would come back in, reactivate the construction site. And in 2016, we completed this thing. We got it tested. You see there's a big arm on top that will swing out to interface with the vehicle. There's a white room where the astronauts can prepare to get into the Starliner capsule on top when we start flying that. And then in the lower right, you can see that there's a kind of a seal on the end of that white room that will actually interface with the capsule. And we can put a different seal on the end of that white room to interface with different payload fairing configurations for different customers. So it won't serve just commercial crew. It will also allow us to do late cargo load, for example, 24 hours before launch for the cargo missions as well. The emergency egress system is something kind of unique. We obviously need a way to get astronauts and support crew off the launch pad in the case that something goes wrong. So we worked with a company called Terra Nova, and this is kind of an example of some of the innovative commercial thinking that we're bringing to this. They had a recreational zip line system that already met very stringent safety requirements for recreational use, and we found that with minor modifications, we could accommodate the additional reliability and safety requirements that we need for astronaut emergency evacuation of the CAT, the crew access tower, and we actually can evacuate up to 20 people. That's the maximum number of crew and support personnel that you might have up there at the same time when we're doing hazardous operations. Though we've got 4 lines, they're installed, they're tensioned, 5 seats per line, so we can evacuate 20 people, and it carries you about 1,340 feet away from the crew access tower to a landing zone where what essentially will be an armored personnel carrier will be waiting for them to seek refuge in and get them out of the area. And this is installed, operational, and has been tested multiple times now. You've heard earlier today people talk about ICPS, that's the interim cryopropulsion stage. That will be the upper stage that will fly on the first SLS mission in 2019. And this is what it looks like. We started with our Delta IV Heavy upper stage. It's a cryogenic stage. And just had to modify it slightly to meet SLS requirements. We delivered that to Florida several months ago, actually a little bit longer than that. In July, we finished our final testing and processing in our Delta Operations Center. That's one of the processing facilities we have down at the Cape. And in July, we actually took it down the road and delivered it to the space station processing facility where the NASA folks could get a lot more involved. And today, we are actually doing our final hardware acceptance review and turning ownership of that stage over to the Marshall Space Flight Center team. Tomorrow, they will turn around and have another special review to hand it over to the team down at KSC that will then take ownership of it and have hands-on from now until we actually get to that launch in 2019. So we're very excited about that. Multiple cargo configurations. So right now we are working to accommodate 2 different cargo customers. NASA is the ultimate customer, but we work with Orbital ATK. We've actually flown 3 missions for them already on Atlas. The most recent one was the OA-7 mission this last April. And we are in discussions with them about flying more of their Cygnus cargo missions on top of Atlas, and also talking about how we can bring some enhanced capabilities because Atlas brings a lot of excess performance to the table. So we want to figure out how can we put that performance to good use to benefit NASA. So those discussions are ongoing. And then you probably know that we're going to be flying the Sierra Nevada cargo configuration as well. First launch of that is planned in the 2019-2020 timeframe. And what it is it's a Dream Chaser that's able to fold up its wings so it fits inside a 5-meter payload fairing, our standard 5-meter payload fairing, and it sits on top of, I think I'll call it a trunk, a cargo module. And we are doing all the development activity right now that's required to develop that mechanical interface on the back end that obviously requires kind of a unique payload adapter and separation system. That's all going well, and we look forward to flying that in about 2 years from now, or a year and a half to 2 years. So I mentioned Vulcan. We've got that 60 years of experience on both Atlas and Delta, and we're bringing all that to bear, all the lessons learned we have from decades of operating in these vehicles and developing new versions of them, and we're combining that with a lot of new ideas and new technology to create Vulcan. And we'll have about probably a 3-ish year overlap between Atlas and Vulcan. We want to make sure that we do things very conservatively and that we have an opportunity to demonstrate Vulcan, prove its reliability, and meet all the government certification requirements before they start flying some of their more valuable missions on it. And to do that, we'll be working with commercial customers to get a lot of those cert flights out of the way, and we'll keep Atlas available until Vulcan has firmly established itself. When we initially fly Vulcan, we will be flying it with a modified version of Centaur, and we've recently decided we're going to make some enhancements to Centaur to increase its performance. We've talked about a 2019 launch capability for Vulcan. With those enhancements to Centaur, that might affect that by a few months, but that's still the time frame that we're targeting. And then eventually we'll have our new upper stage called ACES, which you see on the right there, and that is what we're really excited about. That's going to usher in a whole new realm of launch vehicle capabilities that we've only dreamed about up until now. Here's a little closer look at ACES. We've actually talked about maybe coming up with a different name for it, but I think people have kind of decided they like that ACES name, and it lends itself to some pretty cool logos. The final version of ACES, we've published papers on it. You can take a look at our website if you want to see those. But it incorporates what we call IVF, integrated fluids, or integrated vehicle fluids. What that does is it makes use of the boil-off from those cryogenic propellants, the oxygen and the hydrogen, and it puts them to use. Instead of just venting those precious resources overboard, we actually tap into that boil-off gas, and we can do 3 things with it. We can run it through hydrogen-oxygen thrusters and get attitude control and a little bit of delta V capability and eliminate the need for a hydrazine system. Another thing you can do is you can do autogenous pressurization. You can we'll actually run those propellants through an internal combustion engine, I'll talk more about that in a second, and generate heat that you can then use to warm up those gases and then pressurize your tanks, which means you have to carry a lot less helium, and you don't have to add more helium bottles for long duration missions. And then maybe the most exciting thing you can do with it is that internal combustion engine that I mentioned can actually run a generator, and you can generate your own electricity, which gives you, it eliminates the need to carry as many batteries, and it gives you long duration capability, the ability to generate power. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can do with that. We're actually working with Roush, who's famous in the automotive and racing industry, to develop a hydrogen-oxygen internal combustion engine. It's going to be a straight line 6-cylinder engine. I think it'll weigh around 100 pounds or so, and it will fit on Centaur, and it will use that hydrogen and oxygen boil-off gas to provide all those services. When we incorporate that on ACES, that takes the longevity of ACES from the hours that we have with Centaur today, the several days we think we'll have with the initial version of ACES, up to virtually unlimited duration, because we're going to combine it with refueling capability and other things that will give us a truly reusable upper stage in orbit. That, we think, will help unlock this whole set of commercial capabilities that many of us have dreamed about for many, many years in low Earth orbit, in high Earth orbit, on the moon, around the moon, at libration points. And you may have seen some of the infographics that we've put together on this. This is what we call the CISLUNAR 1000 vision. it talks about it illustrates the possibilities that we could see in the next 30 years. Today, we do a lot of things in low Earth orbit. We do research on the ISS. We do a lot of imaging. We do COMSATs, both in LEO and in geosynchronous orbit. And at any given time, we might have 5 people living in space on the space station. Within the next 5 years, there are a lot of companies out there who plan to do prospecting to identify resources that can be mined in space, both on the surface of the moon and in the asteroid belt or in near-Earth asteroids. There are companies that plan to fly experiments to start demonstrating manufacturing capability in space. And as we develop ACES and Vulcan, that's the market that we want to support in addition to our traditional customers. If you look a little bit further out, I said that ACES is going to have refueling capability. We're going to have long-term cryogenic storage depots. We hope to be a buyer of whoever mines water on the moon and turns it into rocket propellant, liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen, so that ACES can have a fuel station that it can pull up to and have virtually unlimited lifetime on orbit to either act as a tug for moving other payloads around or for connecting to a mission that needs a power source and providing electricity. I mean, the possibilities are endless. And then if you look out 30 years, this is just one example of the types of things that might be enabled. That's a generation away. Who knows what's really going to happen. But that's the vision that we have in mind as we develop Vulcan and ACES for the future. And I think that's it for my pitch.
Great. Vern, thank you so much. Regarding your intern rocket program that you run each summer, I represent about 10 different spaceports from Alaska down to Florida, and even one in Sweden. So if you need places to launch, I've got places, and I'm sure Mozina over here will take on the Swedish mission if need be. So, okay, I'd like to now turn over to Julie Van Cleek, who's going to give us a perspective on the commercial sector from Aerojet.
Okay, can you bring up the slides for Aerojet Rocketdyne JVK slides? Okay. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Chris, for inviting me to be on this panel. What I'd like to do is maybe first talk a little bit about Aerojet Rocketdyne and then talk about our experience in commercial spaceflight. And pick the title on there says Today's Commercial Spaceflight, because what I'm going to do is contrast. We've been doing commercial work in space for multiple decades, and it's changed a lot since when we started to where we're at today. And I'm going to go through a little bit of that history and maybe talk about why it's changed and contrast what it was to what it is. Aerojet Rocketdyne is a power and propulsion company. We're just under a $2 billion company, about 5,000 people through multiple plants in the United States. We focus on power and propulsion. We do some integrated systems. We're pretty diverse for that type of company, both in the type of product we do, the different organizations we work with, and the different type of contracts we have. So we have to be pretty agile to do that. And our company's evolved quite a bit since it came into being many decades ago. We're actually an amalgamation of multiple companies, and that provides a lot of, I think, strength to the company, also a lot of challenges as you merge cultures. In terms of propulsion, we work in liquid propulsion, solid propulsion, electric propulsion, very, very small propulsion that, in some of the spacecraft and COMSATs, very large propulsion, boosters, upper stage. We also, some people don't know this, we work a lot in power. We provide we're the original contractor for all the ISS power system, and we now provide the lithium-ion batteries that are replacing the batteries on station. We also provide the power system that's on the rovers on Mars, what you see in the movie, the MMRTGs, and working on the EMMRTGs. And we're moving into commercial power now, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Let's see. Is it this one or this one? Oh, the big green one. Oh. Okay, relative to commercial spaceflight, as I said, we've been doing this for quite a while. It started with more the COMSATs and selling product to the original commercial satellite providers. And, you know, again, many of our products came out of working with the government, but then as more and more people started using space, we then had different type of customers who bought product in a different way. And so we've had a lot of experience with many, many different types of contracts, and I'll talk about how those have evolved since we started. And I'll show you a slide on the next page that shows you how we've been here from the 70s up till now, and that business is only growing. Our commercial work is done in our space business. Space business is about half of the company's business, and it's the commercial part of it. And the commercial can be either direct commercial, to a company. There are some, as we talked about, some of these, I don't want to call them pseudo-commercial, but the ones we're doing with commercial crew cargo, which are an emerging kind of commercial, and we sell to many of those prime contractors. But we also sell to many of the newer companies that have got into space, and those are more what people might classify, okay, those are, you invest in a product, sell it, and you hopefully make your profit back later. And I'll talk about some of the trades we do as we look at things like that. Little fact on here, did you know that we are proud to provide to many of the commercial spaceflight companies. There's been a lot of talk over the past few years about trying to divide things into old companies, new companies, traditional versus new company, new space. And to us, it's all space. We sell across, like I said, we're diversified. We sell to everything from pure government to some of the brand new space companies. And a couple of experiences we've had in working with some of the people who have come into this industry in the past 10 to 15 years is we'd sell to them at first, figured, okay, that's great, we like that, but we want the price, we think we can do it in-house. They go and try to do it in-house or give it to someone else, and we've had quite a number of them come back to buy the product from us, all commercial type things, but some of these things are a little harder to do than they might appear when you first start out. Let's see. So if we look across time here, and the top red bar, this is where it all started. There was the ComSats were the first places we started doing work commercially. And these, we sell both internationally as well as domestically. Primarily, this is to large satellite prime customers. Many different types of contracts that we use here. Some we invested totally in the product and got our payback over the life of the product. Sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. Others were that they were just fixed price contracts with commercial terms. Again, we've seen just about every type of contract I think you can imagine. Some from people who think they're in the commercial business, yet they still have all their government terms, to people who hand us one piece of paper, and we've done business under all those different types. If you look at what happened, commercial satellites was the primary part of commercial space until probably the 90s. Then we get into the 90s, and there was a lot of optimism as space became more and more important. Many of you remember some of the names, Teledesic, Odyssey, all the different constellations that were going to go into the sky, which drove both demand on the ComSat side, the satellite side, as well as the launch side. And that's really where some of the original EELV started with, as the government decided they were going to upgrade launch systems, seeing this big commercial demand, they set up a public-private partnership, which was EELV, to go service that demand. The unfortunate part of this whole thing was that demand didn't materialize, and people invested pretty heavily in both satellite contractors as well as launch contractors, ended up investing quite a bit and never really got the returns that they had projected. And that's just a part of this business. We, as a publicly traded company, as we decide what we're going to invest in, there's no sure thing. You go out there and you forecast things as best you can. You decide how much investment makes sense. You look at it from both a strategic and tactical standpoint, and then you proceed. And when the market doesn't materialize, sometimes you get left holding the bag. There was some of that on EELV, and that's just part of it. There have also been other success stories where you invest in more on the satellite side than the launch side to date. But again, it's definitely not a sure thing. So you look at this in the 90s, 2000, we went through that period. I think people learned a lot from that. Then government, again, started EELV. That turned, they realized that was not didn't have the outcome that was projected when that acquisition was started, so they turned and went back more toward a more traditional type of contracting. And then as we see in the 2000s and 2010s, we see, space is still becoming more and more used, more and more a part of everyday's life, which spurred a whole nother set of potential industries and companies getting into space, which is great. I mean, I think it is so good to see that the interest in space is bigger than it used to be. The competition that's there, some of the new people coming in, looking at the problem a different way, drives everybody to be better. So I think it's been positive. So we've seen kind of another space race type thing happening over the past 10 to 15 years, and a number of the names on the slide here. And also, we see the government following with the commercial crew and cargo, where we're using commercial contracting to go service another need. And I think, as Vern just said, you extrapolate this to the next step when we're out there on the moon and servicing those industries. Because as you think about commerce in space and working in space, what you got to do is bring a lot of stuff out there, move it around, and those should all be services. The way I kind of look at this, and I've been on the product development side for a large part of my career, is you pioneer a product, and then you know it pretty well, and then you now take it to that next step where hopefully it's commercially viable and it's usable and serving multiple functions. And that's what I see happening hopefully in our next post-2020 timeframe. This is just a picture of some of the satellites and some of our history in commercial spaceflight, and this is focusing on the satellites. Nearly all geocomsats flying today have our propulsion on it. Let's see, and I had some of the facts here because I didn't know the specifics. We've delivered over 17,000 rocket engines for in-space propulsion commercially. For the largest constellation flying today, which is Iridium, we provided 100% of the original engines, and now with the upgrade that's happening, we also provided those engines. And so it was 800 engines and now another 700 engines, and those are going into the replacement. We've also supported 100% of the GPS constellation procurements all the way from 1 through 3, and provide the GOES weather satellites, and then also propulsion for imaging satellites. So I've learned a lot about working in the commercial industry from that, and then take those lessons learned into the other places where we're applying commercial, or where we're seeing commercial contracting now. And this talks a little bit about that. If we look at some of the products, again, I talked a little bit about launch. We were a part of the original EELV, both in developing engines, motors, reaction control system, tanks, and the products were successful, but some of the business arrangements were not as successful. We, like many others during that time, had business cases depending on 20, 30, 40 launches a year, when we ended up with 5 to 7. That's a pretty hard way to make your money back when that happens. But again, every one of these things, as we go through time, we've learned from how you actually do this. As a publicly traded company, you have to be responsible to your shareholders, so you have to have deals and make business decisions that make sense for your shareholders. We obviously learned a lot with those and apply those as we go forward. We're in I don't know if people in this room know, we're in the tank business. It's a commercial satellites. We sell also to the government, but sell across a gamut, a huge number of customers. Probably 80% of that business is commercial business. Again, very similar type, it's a smaller product, sells for a little bit less, but it's typical, same type of business practices that we have to apply to that. As we're looking at what's happening in ComSats now, we're seeing evolution to higher power buses. We're seeing how things are going all electric. We've been in electric propulsion since there was electric propulsion. We sell it commercially. We're also involved in developing the higher power systems. And we see that those in the future will be important for actually moving cargo around when we're working and living in space. So a number of different applications across many different products. And then this talks about what we're kind of excited about for the future here and where we're going. I'll talk a little bit about investments and some of the different attributes of some of our arrangements here. On the left-hand side, you see rocket engine, large investments, drive innovation. We are investing pretty heavily in public-private partnerships, developing new products, and those are everything from the ground all the way through in space. Again, rocket engines for the next generation of launch vehicles, as well as the high-power electric. And you see both the rocket engine and the electric on the left-hand side of the page. We are involved pretty heavily in commercial crew and cargo, providing both commercial power as well as commercial propulsion to those systems. Again, depending on who we're working with, it's a different arrangement, but working on virtually or most of the systems there. And then large public-private partnerships, and the upper right-hand side is a picture of the new program that Boeing has from DARPA, the XSP program, creating a reusable system. We're going to be using repurposing the RS-25 and be using that as the main propulsion on that. The goal of that program is to have 10 flights in 10 days. We'll be starting that test program to demonstrate that here, hopefully this March or April. And so that's to us, if we can meet the goals of that program, we think that has a potential of drastically reducing the cost of space flight. And then below that is a picture of our Bantam engine, which is a 3D printed rocket engine. We're looking at that for use in some of the low-cost launchers as well as low-cost stages. If you can make that top picture work on the XSP, what you need is a very low-cost upper stage to complete the picture. And so we see engines like that as being relevant. So it's, again, we've always been a company that's invested in the future, invested in innovation, pushes state of the art. I think one of the things we have done is we're an experienced company, so we know when to put the state of the art in something and when not. And so you want to test the technology. It's ideal to have something that works and then improve it. But we are also going some total clean sheets, and so you look at the problem from both ways, and it's it works. The clean sheet works. If it does and meets your goals, it can be a great deal. It just sometimes doesn't quite get you there. And so just close with where we're at today. This is just a picture of all the different places we work in space. And again, space is very important to our company. It is half our business, from observing the Earth to launching humans into space, both for the government as well as hopefully commercially, communications, and then deep space exploration. And it's a business we're very proud of. It's a very dynamic business. As we're looking at commercial and the expansion of what we do in space, we think it takes not just new products, but new ways of looking at the business deal. And we've spent 40 years refining that, and we still have a lot of lessons to learn, but it's certainly exciting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. I'm going to start off with some of the group questions, and I want to get a couple of questions to each of you individually, and then I also want to engage the audience in a few questions in the time that we have left. So here's just a quick one in 30 seconds or less, if you have. It looks like there's going to be a lot of competition in the global launch industry. Tell me how you believe your company will be well positioned to take advantage of these future opportunities. Sam, I want to start with you.
Well, I think our approach of reusability is going to position us well. We recognize that there's some challenges associated with that, but with our focus on profitability, and doing things affordably and meeting customer expectations, I think that we'll stand a good chance of meeting those objectives, primarily through the reusability of the first stage of the new Glenn. But that, we still have some things to do there, but I think the commitment of the leadership team and the team overall will get us there.
Great. Travis?
Yes, in terms of commercial SSA and space traffic management services through our ComSpot, we've actually already started. Really, we were the first in terms of delivering those commercial SSA services. Boeing was our first commercial launch that we supported back in 2014. And should, again, even if half of these mega constellations get launched, the type of decision quality information they need to achieve those missions. They will need some, it will require higher accuracy depiction of those launches, and we're well positioned to provide those types of services.
Great. Vern?
I think in the near term, the reliability and the schedule assurance that our systems provide will help us continue to serve, the most critical payloads. And then when Vulcan ACES comes online, I think the long duration capability of ACES combined with some of the services that we'll be able to provide, the power generation and things like that, I think it's going to open up whole new market spaces that we'll be able to serve.
Okay, great.
I think what we're doing is we're infusing advanced manufacturing products or technologies into some of our existing systems and improving those from an affordability standpoint, but yet maintaining the reliability. And then we're also, we've been in the reusable business for a long time and understand that one very well. We're taking all the lessons learned from that and putting into the next gen reusable systems to try to get those to the true 10 flights in 10 days, which we think is what's necessary to really hit that cost equation.
Okay, great. Travis, I just want to extrapolate a little bit on something you said. If even a fraction of these planned space activities take place, how will you be able to ensure safety in the space environment for that marketplace?
Yes, that is the challenge. And given as I showed in one of my slides, the number of just pure conjunction warnings will increase almost exponentially. The challenges some of the operators face today is that the quality of the information on those warnings they get is not decision quality. So some of them actually turn a blind eye or ignore them because it's not that the accuracy is not there, and the error portrayal of that accuracy is not there. So it really comes down to automating the conjunction warnings, having some smarts about managing the big data challenges, and leveraging state-of-the-art software processes that we have in place. We'll continue to innovate, leveraging the commercial entrepreneurial spirit.
Okay, great. I just want to point out, in the program, Virgin Galactic was going to be at Rich Dalbell, but unfortunately, Rich could not make it today due to a family emergency. But I've got a question in that same vein towards, with Virgin in mind, but also Blue. Sam, can you talk about the suborbital marketplace, and do you feel it's big enough for the U2 competitors and others that may come online? And then also, the part two of that question is, can you talk about some of the great work that you guys do in suborbital research with some of the various users of your New Shepard?
Well, I think the suborbital market is something that we're confident exists at some level. When we've had conversations about it, at Blue, often, we get that question internally: is there a real market there? We believe there's certainly a market there initially. I think the cost point would be nice to get lower so more people could involve themselves and become astronauts, on their own opportunity. We're really developing New Shepard, and mostly in part to practice, flying flying it suborbitally as a reusable launch system, and then carrying those lessons learned into New Glenn. So that's that's a big part of what New Shepard is about. If we can have an ongoing business case that allows us to continue to support that market, then we will do that. We feel like there is a substantial market there. I think Virgin has done a good job of establishing that market. I think our ride is a little bit different than theirs, and I think potentially there might be two different customers that might have a preference over one type of ride over the other. But that's something that other parts of our team are working out. I'm not directly involved in that, but I certainly hear those conversations. As far as the science and the payloads, Erica Wagner leads that for our company, and she does a good job of reaching out to schools and to other commercial providers. There's a model that I think is legitimate that gives somebody that's going to build a payload and wants to fly it to ISS, sometimes there's opportunity on parabolic flight But, really designing those mechanisms, how to make that experiment work on the bench, do testing, potentially flying that on a parabolic flight or flying it on New Shepard as a payload. With our particular system, you get your payload back, which is, a real benefit. And you could potentially fly it several times to make sure your mechanisms are proper, because there's nothing more disappointing than to probably fly your experiment on ISS and then have a wrinkle with it and, not get the results you want. So it also gives students and other customers or stakeholders the opportunity to go through the systems engineering process of preparing that payload multiple times, and it probably would increase the success rate, I would think, over. I have my daughter, I'm encouraging my daughter to do the same thing, so I'm trying to send her down that path. So I think that I believe in it. So.
Sam, I don't want to deny you the opportunity to make some news here. Do you want to let us know when you guys are going to start carrying passengers into space?
We've shared in the past that we're intending to do it next year, planning to do it next year, and it's still that way in the plan. We're going to be launching the human-rated system here, this year is what the plan is. So.
Great, great. Vern, ULA and Bigelow recently announced a deal to launch the BE-330 on a Vulcan rocket, and a few months ago, you also announced an MOU to launch Astrobotics to the moon. Can you tell us a little bit about these and other commercial partnerships that ULA is pursuing?
Sure. So we started working with Bob Bigelow's company about a year and a half or so ago on doing some real early integration work. I mean, there's been discussions for years, but we actually started looking, okay, what would it take to really fly a B-330 module on an Atlas at the time? We've done some preliminary integration work, and recently it became apparent that, well, with the time frame that he wants to fly in, Vulcan is probably a better choice. Vulcan has more, will have more performance capability and is probably a better fit. So we continue to work with the Bigelow team to do some early integration activity to prepare to take a B-330 module to wherever he wants us to deliver it to. I think the recent announcement was focused on a low lunar orbit. I think that he'll continue to look at that, refine that, and figure out exactly what location has the most value, and we just want to make sure on the integration side that we're ready whenever he decides that he wants to launch a real module anywhere, whether it's LEO or the moon. So that activity is going on. And Astrobiotic, I think we said we would fly as early as 2019. So we've looked at some packaging concepts for how we could put them inside a canister essentially and fly them underneath the primary payload. We would fly them as a secondary payload. So probably the biggest challenge right now is to find a good match on either a commercial or a government mission that we could put them underneath. And then after we separate that primary mission, we would then put them on a lunar trajectory. And then we're talking to a lot of other folks as well. Nothing we're really ready to announce, but I think there's information out there, for example, how we're working with Roush on that internal combustion engine that we're going to fly on Centaur on the ACES for integrated vehicle fluids. A lot of smaller agreements like that. We've got a strategic partnership with RUAG, who manufactures our payload fairings and our composite structures. And by establishing that strategic partnership, we're able to share the risk and get better pricing. We're actually providing space for them in our factory over at Decatur, so there's a lot of economic advantages. So we've got quite a few different activities like that going on.
Okay, great. And Julie, Aerojet's been involved in commercial for decades. How do you, and I think you did a pretty good job of saying how you've seen at Aerojet commercial evolve. How do you see the industry continue to evolve, and if you can highlight, maybe some of the important things that you see Aerojet being involved with in the near future?
I think there's different parts of the industry. I think the ComSat side's fairly mature, and that'll be a supply-demand. Again, we're in a wave where we're developing new products, new capabilities, and so that'll seek its own level. But I think there's a fair amount of a stable demand there, so it's it's one that doesn't have quite as much risk, at least from do I want to get into this or not? I think launch is similar. There are some things that could drastically change launch, like some of the, if some of us hit some of the reusability targets that are there. And again, we'll continue to work that. Reusability is potentially a game changer if you truly can meet the type of turnaround times and if you don't have the maintenance a lot of maintenance between them. Again, hopefully if we can get to those things, we will see more demand, because the other thing is you depend on a lot of flights or a lot of volume to make that work. In terms of the other side, it's really working in space, moving things in space. I think that's going to happen. It's just, is it going to happen in the next, few years, in the next decade or longer? And when that happens, I think things such as services, moving things around, large structures around, there will be commercial ferries, things like that. And obviously all those things need propulsion or propulsion power. And we're looking at a number of things like that. It's just really a matter of, is it going to happen? I'm convinced it's going to happen. It just isn't going to happen and make sense economically from a commercial standpoint in the next decade, or is it going to take longer?
Okay, great. Travis, I got one back at you. How do you see space situational awareness and space traffic management services demand grow when the U.S. government is also providing those same services? Is it a cooperation, competition, coopetition?
Could be all of the above, though. Well, let me first say that what Eric was referring to is the U.S. Air Force is providing on spacetrack.org the TLEs to the entire world, and that's been a service that was certainly needed and pretty much the only entity that could provide that type of service. But just as the commercial remote sensing marketplace and commercial launch marketplace has grown and the demand has grown and technology has matured, commercial SSA services is also here, and there is a demand. As I referenced earlier, the commercial operators need decision quality information, and there have been several operators who have opted for a paid-for SSA and STM service to protect and perform their missions. I also see the investment in terms of providing these services is not as significant, and there are other, the technology is there, the demand is there, and there are commercial providers that are able to do this. I also see the government being a customer of these types of services and capabilities, given that the value is very economical, and there's a lot of technology, continuous innovation from the commercial marketplace being able to provide this service.
Okay, great. I've got a laundry list of questions, but I do want to open it up to the audience if there's any questions. And if I ignore your hand, it's only because I'm blinded by the light. So, is there any right now, or if you want to think about them, I got one in the hopper. Okay, I see one there right in the center.
For Travis, so looking forward, we're going to need to be able to keep track of objects not only around the Earth, but around the Moon, and as programs develop other planets. Are we set up to be able to start doing the traffic control we do here in those other environments, or is that something that's to come?
I don't know that we're set up for that today. However, I know through our ComsBox services, we fully intend to have space-based assets that would help that. And just as NASA talked about today, continue to go further and further out into the solar system, I do see the technical feasibility of being able to provide SSA and STM services even out that far.
Thanks, Travis. I think we have a question up there, Alan.
This is for Julie. Did you say the XS1 would be using the RS-25?
Yes, I did.
So when you look at them envisioning that as a reusable engine and your NASA customer looking at transforming it into an expendable engine, how do you manage that?
Very carefully. That's a good question. I think the RS-25 was designed to be a reusable engine, is a reusable engine. For the SLS mission, it's expendable. What we're doing there is, as I talked about earlier, we're looking at how many of the newer technologies we've developed over the past several decades that bring the cost down, how do we put those into that engine as we bring the production line back up to lower the cost of that engine? Because obviously when you're going to throw it away each time, you want it to to be as lowest cost as possible. We want the reliability, and we don't want to violate the cert and qual history. It's probably the most well-known rocket engine on the face of the, or well-characterized rocket engine on the face of the planet. So it's great for launching humans. We know what it is. What we have to do is continue to drive costs out, because if it's going to be thrown away. But doesn't mean we have to change. We're not going to change fundamental architecture, and so. All rocket engines or true engines, boosters, they're pretty much reusable because you test them on the stands, so they are reusable. It's just what do you have to do to them in between, and how robust are they with the start transients. I don't see us right now making a lot of changes to the fundamental engine for XSP. We're going to characterize and see how quick we can get the turn times on it. As we develop it and we put the new production line in place, I don't see why that engine wouldn't be usable for XSP also.
Okay. You have time for one more, or?
One more, one sentence answer.
I think we have one right there.
Hi, I wish this could be a one-sentence answer, but what I hear from you all is that to some extent the commercial spaceflight companies, you compete with each other, and in other ways you collaborate with each other. So I was wondering, what is your stance on intellectual property given that? Do you lean more towards shared platforms, or do you try and protect your intellectual property, or is it a mix of both?
Tackle that on the intellectual property issue.
Well, there's definitely an interest in protecting our intellectual property. As you contemplate a collaborative agreement, part of the discussion is going to be how will the intellectual property be handled. And it's possible that there could be an agreement to share the intellectual property, but in general, I think the starting point is that each company wants to protect its intellectual property.
Well, and there's rules, ITAR, and all kinds of other things that play into it. I think those are the more, companies are going to protect their IP, and the government's going to have a say. So we'd have to work through both those questions.
My final question was going to be to ULA and tell me who the engine provider is going to be for Vulcan, but we're out of time, so we're just going to have to wait on that answer. But Sam, Travis, Vern, Julie, I can't thank you enough for your time, for your intellect and insight that you provided, and really the fantastic overview that you gave of overall all your companies and the great work that you're doing in our industry. So thank you so much.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back in here promptly at 3:45 for our spotlight speaker, Dennis Andrusik. Excellent. Thank you.